One of my favorite things about the Gospel of Mark is the way in which it depicts Jesus' earliest followers, his disciples, the apostles. And one of the things that's wonderful about it is he depicts them in all of their humanity with all their flaws. Sometimes it seems to focus on what the disciples get wrong. Matthew and Luke talk about this as well, but they seem much more aware that these disciples are the foundation of the early church, and they soften it a bit. Whereas Mark seems to suggest, especially in all the gospel before Jesus' death and resurrection, that even his closest followers don't quite get it. We have two examples of that in today's gospel reading. The first reading, part of the reading, we have Jesus trying to explain to his followers that his way of being Christ, his way of being a Messiah, is not going to look like what they expect. Instead of conquering with power, it's going to look like defeat. And he talks about how he's going to be handed over and crucified and then rise on the third day. And our text says, "But they, the disciples, did not understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to question him." They just can't fit in their mind the idea of a Messiah who loses, or at least appears to lose. And this idea of how do we be great or how do we be powerful continues in the second part of the gospel, where they finish their journey, they get to the house, and Jesus says, "What were you arguing about on the way here?" But they remain silent, for they had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then Jesus sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all." And then he takes a child and brings a child into the room. And we need to remember in this period, when we think about children, we in the 21st century have a kind of romantic idea sometimes about children. They're cute, they're funny, they're wonderful. They thought that as well, but they were also the lowest of the low. No rights, no status, kind of an economic burden until they were old enough to start helping with the family. Jesus takes a child then, puts his arm around the child and says, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." We have Jesus trying to teach his disciples and us a different way of being a leader, a different way of being the greatest. Now, we hear the phrase servant leadership thrown around a lot in our world. If you go on LinkedIn, everyone describes themselves as a servant leader. But here we have Jesus, by example, saying this is what leadership within the Christian community, or leadership that tries to imitate Christ, looks like. It's service to the least, service to the people who might be the most vulnerable, service to the people who have no power, and service that receives everyone based on their humanity rather than based on their status. I've been thinking about this a lot in the last few days as we've been praying for the recovery of Pope Francis, and praying for him to continue his ministry as the Pope, but also in gratitude for everything he's done so far. And one of the things he's done so far is given us a model of what this kind of leadership through service of others, leadership through receiving all, can mean. It seems like one of the things that really hurt his health is that he didn't like to cancel a meeting. He wanted to receive everybody, whether they were a group of pilgrims or a visiting diplomat, or he just didn't like disappointing people, and so wanted to make sure that he was of service to everyone. There's a funny story that his doctor the other day apparently went in and said, "Good morning, Holy Father, buongiorno, Santo Padre," and Pope Francis replied right back with, "Good morning, Holy Son." That this recognizing the shared holiness, the shared humanity of people, regardless of their status, regardless of their positions. In many ways, Pope Francis is doing a good job of imitating his namesake, Francis of Assisi, who had a similar way of expressing God's love to people by letting go of the trappings of power, letting go of concern about ego or status in order to be as present as possible. And in many ways, this is what Jesus is trying to teach his disciples in this gospel text and all of us. How do we let go of making ourselves the center of the story and instead make God the center of the story? Jesus gives us pretty concrete instructions that by making other people, regardless of their status, and especially other people who by the standards that we all carry around in our heads and in our culture, by those standards are lower than us, more important than us, we have a way of imitating Christ. We have a way of actually receiving Christ, and as he says in the text, receiving the Son of Man and receiving the one who sent him. So as we this week continue praying for the recovery of Pope Francis, we might take a moment of gratitude for the example he has given us of how to, even if you're the quote-unquote most powerful person in the Roman Catholic Church, to go to the start with the putting Christ at the center, and to do that in a way that makes Christ the criterion of how we welcome someone, not their title, not their degrees, not their wealth, but instead the fact that their holiness and their potential for holiness is right there as part of who they are as a human being.